Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Be right. We'll be right with you. All right. Good morning, everyone. Why don't we get started? Let's see. What am I doing wrong here? Okay. What I wanted to see with you this morning is just a very short paragraph from a tshuva from Rav Moshe Feinstein regarding this whole idea of hair coloring. We said before that you're not allowed to dye your servant's hair in order to misrepresent the sale, right? And that was really essentially the theme of this halacha, that you're not allowed to misrepresent the product that you're selling in order to by coloring it or by changing its exterior, and you're covering a blemish that will only be discovered later. And so yesterday we got into a tshuva in the biurim as to whether it's ever permitted for a man to dye his hair. And the conclusion is that yes, it is, provided that it is for purposes, let's say, of finding a shidduch, or let's say the person has, excuse me, or let's say a person has an embarrassing hair color situation where a portion, he's got a splotch of white in the midst of some black hair and so forth. And Rav Moshe Feinstein has this very short piece over here. I hope everyone can see it. Uve'im kavanas tziviyaso. Everyone see that? So he writes, Uve'im kavanas tziviyaso hu lo liyifoy. He says, if the objective of your hair dyeing is not to beautify yourself, because that's already an act that a woman would do. It's a vanity. If it's for vanity purposes, so the halacha really does not permit a man to dye his hair, to color his hair. But let's say it's not for vanity purposes, ela kadesha yikabluhu lemishra, but he wants to be able to get hired for a job. Ba'ofen she'ein iser ona, because he knows that there's, what do we call it, ageism? Is that what we call it, or age discrimination? He says, as long as there's no ona'ah in your misrepresentation of your age through your hair color, okay, kagon sheyodea sheyasa hamalacha kitzair, meaning that you know that you can do the job as well as a kid that's 25 years your junior, right? So you know that the company is interested in hiring young people, but you know that you can do the job as well, if not better, than a young kid. It's an office job, or it's a tech job, but you know that the attitude of the people that you go to interview for is they're looking for a young, exciting person. So mistaver sheyesh lahatir kamo belovesh mipnei hachama v'hatzina. He says it makes sense to me, says Rav Moshe, that we should say that this is mutter, And it's no different from a man who wears a woman's clothing, not so that he can look like a woman or not so that he can have colorful clothing, but let's say it's the only thing that he has available to him to protect him from the sun or from the cold. Shehiter habach kedeheviu hataz sifkat dalad bahashach sifkat zayin. He says, and this is brought by both the Shach and the Taz in their commentary to Shulchan Aruch. I mean, I remember there was once a time when I needed an umbrella, and the only umbrella that I could find in the house was this pink one with purple polka dots. And it was clearly a feminine umbrella, but it still had the functionality of protecting me from the rain. So I took it, right? So could one argue that I was guilty of beged isha, of donning a woman's accessory? Perhaps, but I didn't want to get wet, right? So it's the same thing over here. As long as your objective is not for vanity purposes or to do anything feminine in nature, he says, "V'hiskimu lazeh, kevin shehu rak davar echad v'lo mistama bazeh leisha." He says, since it's only one aspect of your garb, and you're not doing it so that you can resemble a woman or do anything feminine in nature, then it's perfectly okay. And then he writes, "Acharei kasvise nizdamen liliro sefer hamor lahagram prail shemedaber bazeh v'chein tshuva mehagon Rav Moshe Mordechai Epstein haram dislabatka." He says, I noticed that two other great gaonim that came before me have already addressed this question. V'helu gam kein lahater litzvoa bishvil hasagas mishra kishalek iser ona ein sham. And they concur. They concur that it is permitted to for a man to dye his hair in order to get a job, provided that you're not misrepresenting your ability. Obviously, if it's manual labor, and the reason why they want to hire a young person is because it requires a lot of stamina. At the age, let's say you're 50, and at your age, you're going to need to take a significant break in the middle of the day. So then you're not allowed to dye your hair. But if it's a job that you feel confident that you can do just as well as a young person, so then you're allowed to. I don't know that we would go so far as to say that you're allowed to lie and misstate your age, but you can. I mean, today, because of age discrimination laws, I don't even know if it's legal for a job interviewer to ask you your age. Unless it's a specific kind of job where they need to know your age. But I don't know that we can necessarily justify lying, but at least we can justify representing yourself as younger than, or as to look younger than you really are in order to be able to do the job. Okay? So I wanted to show that to you. And now I want to go back to the Imrei Yaakov.
Rabbi, just a quick question on that. A number of years ago, I remember my father went to Korea, and the custom there in Korea was that like all businessmen dyed their hair because it just that was part of their culture, that nobody ever showed any gray. It was a vanity thing, but also like, so when my father showed up with gray hair, it was like just shocking to them. And in a situation like that, where it's done for vanity, but you're also trying to, I guess, fit into the business environment. Would that fall into a category of vanity or for business purposes?
Right. So I think that it falls into the category of what we saw in the Biurim yesterday, that once it becomes an accepted practice for men to do this, like I said, if men are now wearing frilly shirts and powdered wigs, so that's no longer considered to be a feminine activity or feminine garb. So then it becomes completely permissible. in that Korean society, in order for your father to fit in, it would have been permitted for him to dye his hair. But, I guess when he got back to the States, he'd have to let it grow out, the dye, and let his gray hair appear again, unless he was making habitual trips. What did he end up doing, your father?
He kept the gray.
Kept the gray. All right. Yeah. I mean, I think especially on on a white man, if he's of a certain age, it's quite noticeable when he dyes his hair. The people who dye their hair when they're in their 60s or 70s, like people know most of the time that it's dyed. Like
Yeah,
Ronald
my
Reagan.
son and I were talking about that yesterday. That if you go prematurely gray or in your 30s or whatever, you look younger if you dye your hair. If you dye your hair when you're my age, you just look ridiculous.
Well, yeah, remember Ronald Reagan? That's who I was thinking of. I mean, he always looked distinguished, but everyone knew that he dyed his hair. Anyway, let's go on in the halacha. So we were in the middle of the Rav Shulchan Aruch, and I stopped in the middle to go into this issue of dyeing hair. Um, uh, so you want to dye an eved's, a servant's hair, so that when you sell him, he'll look younger. He says, "Ubehema lahashkosa mesubin shemenavchinosa." He says, or to give an animal before you bring it to market, let's say to take a goat or a cow and to have it drink bran water, which is, I guess, water that's been soaking in bran. And the benefit of that is that it causes its belly to be distended, vizokfin sa'aroseha, and it also makes the hair stand up, kedesha teira es shemena, so that it should look fat. So we said that you're not supposed to do that. V'chein asur lekared ulekartsefosa kedei liskov sa'aroseha, and you're also not allowed to comb the hair or to prop up its hair so that it will make its hair look so the animal will look wider and larger than it really is. Let's see, what does lekared mean? Scratch. Lekared is to scratch, and lekartseif is to
Used to be called tease.
tease. Yeah, to scrape. To scrape is really what it means. To scratch or to scrape its hair. Yeah, it could mean that's what teasing is. Yeah. And you're not allowed to color utensils so that they look new. And then it turns out that you're misrepresenting to the customer because the exterior improvement that you do to the object does not make it worth more than it in other words, makes it look more valuable than it really is. Because then people will think that they're new by this external paint job, and this will be deceiving the market. In other words, your painting, the exterior makes it look new, when in reality, it's not a new accessory or item. And this will be deceptive, because when a person purchases a used object, he knows that it has a certain amount of wear, and it doesn't have the same strength as a brand new utensil. But you're allowed to beautify new utensils so that they'll be eye-catching. And like we said at the end, he says, even if you beautify them with some other way, and your investment in beautification is not as much as the price that you're going to charge more than that. He says that's okay if you charge more, because of this little paint job you add. Instead of adding the cost of the paint, which might be only 50 cents, you add another $3 or $4 to the product, to this widget. He says the reason is because people are willing to pay that amount for something that is aesthetically attractive. Okay, so let's just take a look at the Imrei Yaakov over here. Vehakelim, you're not supposed to paint used utensils. Uvizmanenu shiragilim litzvoa mechoniyot yeshanot ein le'esor. He says today, when it's normal to paint used cars before you put them on the used car lot, He says that's okay. Kaven shenikar hadover lakol hahevdol ben chadash uven yashan, because everyone knows the difference between a new car and a used car. A used car is on a used car lot. You look at the odometer and it has mileage on it. So everyone knows that it's a used car. So there's nothing wrong with painting it just to make it look more attractive. Ulam, however, im nishbar hapach shel hamechonit v'hutzova kedei shelo yira'eh hapagam v'hashever. However, if the cab of the car, if the metal of the car is broken, or in some way it's damaged, and you paint it over so that people should not see the damage to the body of the vehicle, zevadayas or dezemata umaan. So that's what we had explained, I think, on our own. He says there's a difference between using a paint job to cover damage or, let's say, rust and stuff like that. That would not be permitted. But if the body of the car doesn't have damage and you're just painting it because the old paint was starting to peel and it just wasn't attractive anymore, so then there's nothing wrong with that. Okay. Sheyera'u chadashim. And you're not supposed to paint something so that it looks new when it's really not. And what I found really interesting is that the Imrei Yaakov here quotes not from a halacha sefer, but he quotes from the Mesilas Yesharim. And so what I figured we would do is let's take a look at it from the original source, from the Ramchal's Mesilas Yesharim. Now, where in the world does the Ramchal discuss fair business practices? So it turns out that he discusses it in the Shar HaNekiyus, in cleanliness, which is making sure it's an advanced chapter in the Mesilas Yesharim, that you have to be careful in the way that you deal with other people in many different ways. And let's see. Right? He talks about Gezel. He talks about working ethics, where you're not supposed to be doing other things when you're working for someone if you're being paid by the hour or the day. And then he continues along in the same theme, and he says, Re'ena v'inyan ha'ona'a. He says, look at ona'a. Kama nakel hula adam lihis patos v'li kashel. Look how easy it is for a person to be enticed to sin. Kasher lichore yir elo yira elo sheroi hu lihishtadil liafot schorato beinei hanashim ulihistaker biyagia kapav. That a person very easily could rationalize that he would like to beautify his merchandise so that he can make more money off of the sale. L'daber al leiv hakona laman yisratzelo, and he'll sweet talk the buyer, the customer. V'yomru al kol zeh yesh zariz v'niskar v'yad charutzim ta'ashir. He says, look, and people will praise him. They'll say, look, he's a sweet-talking salesman. He always makes a deal. He always is able to finalize a deal. And look how industrious this guy is. Omnam im lo yidaktek v'yishkol ma'aseh harbei. He says, however, says the Ramchal, if you're not really careful about how you go about your business activity, hinei tachat chita yetze choach. He says, then instead of growing the wheat, you'll end up growing a thistle. Ki ya'avor ba'avon ha'hona'a asher huzharnu aleha. Because a person could very easily violate the laws of ona'ah that the Torah commands us, v'lo sonu ish es amiso, that no man oppress his fellow. Va'amru zal afilu l'ramos es hagoy aser. And our sages say in the Talmud that even to deceive a Gentile is aser. Ukraksiv sheris Yisrael lo yasu avlo v'lo yidabru chazav v'lo yimatze b'fiham lashon tarmis. And if you remember, we did have this pasuk quoted from Tzefania already in the first chapter when we talked about how a Jew is always supposed to keep his word. But it also has to do with also not being deceptive in the way that you speak. As it says in the book of Tzefania, that the remnant of Israel will do no perversity and will not speak falsely. and they will not be found in their mouths any kind of deceitful language. B'chein amru, and so too, he quotes the Gemara, Ein mefarches in hakelim hayeshanim sheyirau kachadashim, that you're not allowed to paint over the old utensils so that they look new. Ein ma'arvin peros beperos afilu chadashim ba'chadashim afilu sa'a b'dinar. And as we'll see, we're going to see this halacha later on, mixing good quality produce with bad quality produce is also going to be prohibited. Like they do in the grocery, where they'll sometimes on the top of the pile of apples, they'll put the better looking, shinier, redder apples, and they'll put the less desirable ones on the bottom. Va'afilu yafa dinar utrisis lo ya'ari v'yimkarein sa'a b'dinar. And the Gemara gives different examples of the differential in prices. You're not supposed to do that. Kol osei ele, kol osei avel, v'korei chamisha shemos. And anyone who does this acts in a perverse way, the Torah says. And anyone who does this, says the Gemara, is given 5 different names that are really very undesirable appellations. Avel, Sanoi, Meshukatz, Cherim, and Toeva. That he's done an act of perversity, he is despised, he is reviled, he is excommunicated, and he's done an abomination. So Odam Ruzal, our sages further said, Kol hagozel es chavero afilu shava pruta kilo notel nafsho mimenu, that if you steal even a pruta, like a penny from a person, it's as if you're taking his soul away from him. Meaning that you never know when a person's last dollar could be the thing that sustains them and makes the difference between life and death. So even taking a few pennies from a person could potentially be devastating. And therefore you see that misrepresentation, even in a small amount, is a very serious crime. Va'amru od, and our sages further said, Ein hageshamim ne'etzarim ela ba'avon gazel, that the only reason that rainfall is denied, meaning that the reason why droughts occur is because of the sin of theft. Va'od amru kupa maleya avonos mi mekatreg barosh kulam gazel, and our sages further said that if a person has a box full of sins, which individual sin is the one that screams the loudest? It's the sin of theft. V'dor hamabu lo nechtam gezardinam ela al hagazel, and the generation of the flood only had their final die cast, meaning that the reason why their fate was sealed to be destroyed was not because of sinful licentiousness, but rather their fate was sealed because of the sin of thievery. Okay, so he's basically telling us how wrong ona'ah is, to be deceitful in business practice. And then he asks the question, which is what the Imrei Yaakov had quoted. Ve'im tomar bilvavecha. Maybe you'll say to yourself, Ve'eich efshalanu shalo lihishtadel b'ma'asa'enu uv'matanenu l'ratzos es chaverenu al hamekach ve'al shivuyo. He says, how is it possible for a businessman to be industrious and to make a living unless he sweet talks his customer, unless he promotes his merchandise and tells people how amazing it is? Like, what are you expecting of us? You're telling me not to say anything? I mean, am I supposed to just keep my mouth shut and not promote my merchandise? Is essentially what he's asking. He says, Chiluk gadol yesh badavar. He says, let me tell you the distinction that you need to make. Ki kol ma shehu laharos es hakonim amitas tuv hachefetz v'yafyo. He says, if your object is to show the customer the truthful goodness of the merchandise, hine ha'hishtadlus hahu tov v'yashar, then that kind of initiative as a salesman is quite good and upright. Ach mashuhu lechasos mumei chetzo. But if your promotion is to, in the course of your promotion, you are seeking to cover up the blemishes of the product, eino ella ona'a va'aser. Then that's ona'a and it's aser. V'zeh klal gadol be'emunas hamasa ve'hamata. And this is the most important rule, he says, when it comes to engaging in business. Go ahead and promote your merchandise. If you're promoting the goodness of the product, then by all means. But if you're promoting your product in a way that covers up its defects, then that's aser and that's ona'a. And ultimately, people will tell you what makes a good salesman, right? So anyone who's ever been in sales knows that you've got to believe in your product in order to be a good salesman. If you're selling cheap suits, right, and you think that the merchandise is dreck, as they say in the industry, right, then you try to tell people that this is the finest merchandise and it's such high quality. So then, if you're expected to say that, that's what the manual in the store tells you to say. So you're not going to be a good salesman because you don't believe it. It's not good quality. You can say, this is a beautiful suit and it's a great bargain at this price. That's what you can say. But you shouldn't misrepresent the product. Look, it's made in China. The workmanship is shoddy. It's got it bunches here, it bunches there. It's not gonna be the most flattering because not a lot of effort was put into the tailoring of this merchandise. You don't have to say that. You don't have to say all of that. But let's say you know that. So don't tell your customer that this is a finely crafted suit, because it's not a finely crafted suit. But what you can say is that it looks really nice and it's a tremendous bargain at that price. It's going to be hard to beat that price anywhere else. That's what you can say. You can always find something truthful to say about a good piece of, about a piece of merchandise that the market wishes, that the market will bear. And if at the end of the day you find that the product that you're expected to sell truly is defective, then you should get out of it. You should go try to sell something else. Don't try to sell something that's truly defective. I think it's true in high tech as much as it is in low tech. In the high tech industry, if I'm working for a tech company and I happen to be aware of the fact that this product has a lot of bugs in it, has a lot of defects in its technology, because during the beta testing, we discovered a whole bunch of kinks in this product. So then I have to tell my manager, I don't feel comfortable selling this product. It's not ready yet. And, to misrepresent it and say, I was once put in that position. I felt very, very uncomfortable. I was working for a tech company in the 90s. The early 90s, when, things were just getting off the ground. And we had a product that we were selling that was not yet properly beta tested. And I felt miserable because I was in charge. I wasn't selling the product, thank God. I couldn't sell it, but I was part of tech support. And I wasn't under a halachic obligation to tell the customer that they made a terrible purchase because we haven't finished this product yet. But the number of calls that I received from the customers who were upset that the product wasn't working the way that it was supposed to work, and that they were getting error messages all the time, was very, very disheartening. And you have to know when you bet on the wrong horse, Okay. Questions, comments? Okay. So we're just coming up on 7 o'clock, so I think we'll hold it for today. All right, and we'll continue with the next halacha, Mir Tzashem.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Tomorrow.
Shukrach.
Great day, everybody.
Take care, gentlemen.